We begin my top 24 remaining tight end rankings. Remember that players who played on Thursday night or if they're on bye are not included in these rankings. So if you see a player that, or don't see a player rather, that fits under that criteria, that's why. We begin with Colby Parkinson, Tyler Conklin, Will Dissly, Pat Fryermuth, and Chig Okonkwo. Colby Parkinson has seen a sharp decrease in his production with the arrival of Cup and Puka back in the lineup. I do think he sees some involvement in this game. I just think that there are a lot better options that you could rely upon this week. Tyler Conklin against Arizona, kind of like with Colby, with the addition of Devonte Adams, that's really hurt him. I do think he gets a couple chunk gains in this one, though. And if you're in a desperation mode, you could potentially play him. Will Dissly against Tennessee, same thing. When he's the only tight end that's healthy, he gets a good amount of volume, but that we see that decrease when the tight end room is healthy, with Hayden Hurst in particular. I do think he sees some involvement, but it really isn't a good matchup. Then we have Pat Fryermuth against Washington. Fryermuth is so much more talented than his weekly rankings suggest. It's just, yeah, for whatever reason, he just isn't getting any volume, despite being, in my opinion, the second best option in the passing game to George Pickens. But also, they just brought in Mike Williams, so we'll have to see if that further cuts into his production or not. But uh, in the meantime, he's a desperation option, in my opinion. You could do worse, but you could do a lot better as well. Then we have Chigo Okonkwo. He's been seeing a couple targets a game. He's a really high upside player in the sense of he's one of the more athletic tight ends, and he can do a lot after the catch. It's just this offense is not very conducive to success. I do think he gets a couple of chunk gains in this one. It's a good matchup, but I do think there are a lot more tight ends with higher upside than him this week. Now we have tight ends that I think are probably mid to low end tight end twos this week. We have Laporta, Komet, Theo Johnson, Juwan Johnson, and Zach Ertz. Sam Laporta is playing against Houston. In the first week without JMO, he saw, I believe it was 6 targets, and I know he scored a touchdown. Then this past week, I believe he had 3 targets and really was minimally involved. I think he gets 1 catch and a touchdown in this one, and so I think he's a tight end too, but I just think the involvement is so minimal that it's really hard to trust him on a weekly basis. Then we have Cole Kmet against New England. Same thing, his involvement, it's basically been non existent. I still think that he's going to get a couple grabs in what is an advantageous matchup, but if Shane Waldron continues to not involve him, then he's just going to have to drop in these rankings weekly. Then we have Theo Johnson against Carolina. He is questionable. He was able to get in some limited practices. He scored a touchdown this past week. He looked really, really good. I do think he is their second, arguably at least, their second best pass catching option. He's by far their best tight end. It's a good matchup, and so I do think that he's a decent high upside play, but I think he is one of the riskier ones due to his uh, inconsistent involvement in terms of his target share. Then we have Juwan Johnson against Atlanta. I really like him and Taysom Hill this week. With Chris Olave being sent to the hospital by Derek Carr, I do think they're going to have to start getting their tight ends more utilization, and so I do think that Juwan Johnson is a sneaky upside play. Then we have Zach Ertz against Pittsburgh. This past week it was brutal, but before that he had been getting a ton of volume and had been a really strong start. I don't think he's going to be a weekly top 10 option, but I do think that he is one of the safer floor options due to, at least in general, receiving a decent amount of involvement in terms of target share. If you don't have an elite tight end, it's pretty hard to have anybody that does get a consistent target share. And so for that reason, I think he's a really safe floor option. I just don't think he's a high ceiling upside this week. If you like what you've seen and heard so far, feel free to like and subscribe. Remember that players who played on Thursday night or if they're on bye are not included in these rankings, so if you see somebody missing, that's why. Also, make sure to check out my quarterback, receiver, and running back rankings this week as they come out on today, if being Friday or Saturday. And once again, if you like what you're seeing and hearing, like and subscribe. Thanks. And now we have tight ends that I think are probably high end tight end twos to low end tight end ones this week. We have JT Sanders, Dallas Goedert, Jonnu Smith, and TJ Hawkinson. JT Sanders is questionable. He was able to get in limited practices. It's a tough matchup against the Giants, but I do think that he is a really talented rookie tight end. He kind of flew under the radar after he didn't receive the potential first round draft capital that we were hoping for, but he looks really good. He had a really good week this past week. I think they should get him involved, and I project them to. And if they do that consistently, I think he's going to be a really strong low end tight end one start on a weekly basis. To potentially more if he's able to, have anything close to what we saw this past week. Then we have Dallas Goedert against Dallas. Dallas against Dallas. But the Eagles' offense is back to full strength, so I do think that limits his potential ceiling. But really, once you get past the elite couple of tight ends, it's just you're just hoping for somebody that at least gets a consistent floor of targets. He does do that, and so I think that he's a decent play against Dallas, but I just don't think he's in consideration for being an elite tight end one this week. Then we have Johnny Smith against the Rams. Just like with Dallas Goedert, it's nice to have a consistent floor of targets. He's had at least 6 in the past 3, I believe. And until we see that stop, I think that he provides you a really safe floor with a decent ceiling if he scores a touchdown. And so I think he's a fringe low-end tight end one on a weekly basis. Then we have TJ Hawkinson against Jacksonville. I was kind of skeptical as to where to put him. I think he's going to see a little bit more involvement in his second week back. It's a good matchup as well. And so I do think that he starts to get rolling just a little bit. I really like Sam Darnold this week. And so I do think that he has a lot of high upside. But until we see him heavily involved in the passing game and we get to see what the target share is going to look like on a week-to-week basis, I would be kind of hesitant to put him back in the elite tier of tight ends just yet. Now we have tight ends that I think are probably mid to low end tight end ones, but I wouldn't consider likely candidates to be the tight end one overall this week. We have Hunter Henry, Kyle Pitts, Taysom Hill, Jake Ferguson, Evan Ingram, and Dalton Kincaid. Hunter Henry is playing in Chicago. It isn't the easiest matchup, but he's been very good for us recently. I don't think he has a touchdown in this one, but I think he sees a good amount of involvement. Then we have Kyle Pitts. He's had a hammy injury. He's gotten in limited practices. I'm guessing he's playing. I do think that limits his ceiling if he's playing through injury. We saw this past week that he was hardly involved whatsoever, which is particularly strange considering Drake London left the game. After a string of elite performances by tight end standards, at least, that was quite disappointing. I still think that he's a relatively strong start considering we know that he has a good amount of upside, at least compared to most of the tight end landscape. But I would really like to see more consistency in terms of his target share and involvement in general. Taysom Hill against Atlanta, with Olave almost certainly being out, I think that he's going to be involved as a quarterback, running back, and tight end. I think that gives him a lot of safety. I do think he scores a touchdown in this game as well. And so I think he's a really sneaky, very, very high upside play this week. Then we have Jake Ferguson against Philly. I think that with Cooper Rush starting, that limits the upside of the offense, but I think that he's going to be the security blanket. So I think that in a way he actually benefits more than most other people in this offense. And so I think that he's going to see a heavy amount of volume and be a really safe floor option this week. Then we have Evan Ingram against Minnesota. I think the same thing with him. With Mac Jones probably starting this week, I think he's going to be a security blanket. And even in a tough matchup, I think he has a really high floor because I think he'll see a pretty high target share. Then we have Dalton Kincaid against Indianapolis. It's an advantageous matchup. There is the possibility of Amari Cooper not playing this week. He has a cast on. I'm guessing he'll probably try to tough it out, but I do think he sees involvement in this one. I don't think he scores, but I think he sees enough involvement to be a top 10 option and have a good amount of upside. Now we have tight ends that I think are elite tight end ones and are realistic candidates to be the tight end one overall. We have Trey McBride, Cade Otton, Travis Kelce, and George Kittle. Trey McBride is one of the more talented tight ends. He did get that rushing touchdown this past week, first touchdown of the season, actually second. He scored 2 touchdowns. One was a fumble recovery and one was a rushing touchdown. Probably not how you would have drawn it up, but we will take it. I don't think he scores, but I think he sees a good amount of involvement in this one, and he's obviously a must start in any format. Then we have Cade Otton against San Fran. He should be the top option once again, with Mike Evans probably missing this one. It isn't the easiest matchup against Fred Warner, but I think he's going to see so much volume that he's a must start and top 5 option weekly at this point. Then Travis Kelce against Denver. Also, not the best matchup, but he's coming off a 16 target game. I don't think he has 16 targets again, but I think he's really heavily involved, and I do think he scores a touchdown in this one as well. And then we have George Kittle against Tampa Bay. I think he scores a touchdown. I think he's heavily involved. I love the entirety of the 49ers offense in this one. I think everybody in this offense is a must start with sky high upside. And so to conclude, tight ends that I think are probably mid to low end tight end twos this week, we have Colby Parkinson, Tyler Conklin, Will Dissly, Pat Freiermuth, and Chick Okonkwo. Tight ends that I think are probably mid to high end tight end twos, we have Sam Laporta, Cole Kmet, Theo Johnson, Juwan Johnson, and Zach Ertz. Tight ends that I think are probably high end tight end twos to low end tight end ones, we have JT Sanders, Dallas Goedert, Jonnu Smith, and TJ Hawkinson. Tight ends that I think are mid to low end tight end ones that I don't think are likely candidates to be the tight end one overall. We have Hunter Henry, Kyle Pitts, Taysom Hill, Jake Ferguson, Evan Ingram, and Dalton Kincaid. And then tight ends that I think are elite top shelf options that are a decent chance to be the tight end one overall this week. We have Trey McBride, Cade Otton, Travis Kelce, and George Kittle. And so that concludes the tight end rankings for Week 10. Remember that players who are on bye or if they played on Thursday night are not included in these rankings. So if you think of somebody that's missing from these rankings and they fit under that criteria, that's why. With that being said, who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Is there somebody that I'm missing from this list entirely? Once you get to the low-end tight end twos, it's really tough to be accurate in the sense of the difference between making or missing this list is nothing almost. But yeah, make sure you let me know. And with that being said, make sure you check out my quarterback, running back, and wide receiver rankings as they come out. Some are coming out today, being Friday, the tight end and quarterback rankings, and then on Saturday, the running back and wide receiver rankings. And so yeah, if you like what you've seen and heard, just like and subscribe. Thanks.